Hello, I'm Esther Gitu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud says his country will defend itself if Ethiopia goes ahead with a deal to set up a naval base in the breakaway region of Somaliland. Marathon world record holder Kelvin Kiptum is remembered for his talent, determination, and humility at Friday's funeral service. And as former U.S. President Jimmy Carter marks 1 year in hospice care, are key parts of his legacy in jeopardy? All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in Kenya, where thousands of mourners, including relatives, friends, and fellow athletes, attended a funeral service on Friday for marathon world record holder Kelvin Kiptum, who was killed in a car accident last Sunday. A black hearse carrying Kiptum's body slowly rolled across the Chepkorio showground in Elgeyo before mourners queued to pass by his casket. Kiptum and his Rwandan coach Jave Hakizimana were killed in a crash near the town of Kaptagat in western Kenya, in the heart of the high-altitude region that is renowned as a training base for the best distant runners from Kenya and across the world. Kiptum was one of the most exciting prospects to emerge in road running in years, having broken the world record in only his third appearance in an elite marathon. His record, set at last year's Chicago Marathon, was ratified by International Track Federation World Athletics just last week. Kenyan President William Ruto and Sebastian Coe, President of the International Association of Athletics Federation, were both in attendance. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud says his country will defend itself if Ethiopia proceeds with a deal to develop a naval base in the breakaway region of Somaliland and possibly recognize the territory as an independent state. Landlocked Ethiopia agreed to a memorandum of understanding on January 1st to lease 20 kilometers of coastline in Somaliland, a territory that Somalia says it owns, even though the northern region has enjoyed effective autonomy since 1991. Ethiopia says it wants to set up a naval base there and offered possible recognition of Somaliland in exchange of prompting a defiant response from Somalia, and fears the deal could further destabilize the Horn of Africa. Somalia and several Western nations, including the United States, which regularly carries out strikes against militants in Somalia, says Ethiopia's port deal is boosting al-Shabaab's recruitment efforts.
That MOU is it's a very illegal and illegitimate in the eyes of the international law, in the eyes of the international customary law, in the eyes of the Charter of the United Nations, the Charter of the African Union, the Charter of IGAD, which all are members. If Ethiopia insists, Somalia will resist and will refuse. If they come into the country, Somalia will do everything that it can to defend itself, definitely. But we hope that we will not reach that level.
President Mohamud told Reuters that according to the intelligence sources, some of the new recruits are nationalists joining because of Ethiopia's recent port deal with Somaliland. South Africa is set to hold national elections on May 29th. Recent polls indicate that the ruling African National Congress may lose its majority for the first time since the end of apartheid 30 years ago. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Under the ANC, South Africa is facing multiple challenges, including high unemployment and electricity crisis leading to frequent blackouts and widespread mistrust among voters due to numerous corruption allegations over the years. Mwini Wamwewi, an associate professor of political science at Winston-Salem State University and author of Politics and Government in South Africa, says the country has a lot of work to do.
It is presented as, quote, the savior of the continent because of liberal democracy, but really when you look at the real issues based on economic, class, gender and race, there are a lot of issues. There are so many people's needs have not been addressed economically, politically, even though there's this facade of freedom.
To boost the economy and address its sluggish growth and high debt, Finance Minister Enoch Godwangana announced plans to increase taxes and spending on social grants ahead of the general election.
We are adding 57.6 billion to pay for the salaries of teachers, nurses, doctors, among many other critical services.
The ANC has been tainted by allegations of corruption and mismanagement. Polls indicate it's likely to drop below 50% in the election, which would force it to form a coalition government with other parties.
When you look at the future, it has to be a coalition of several parties, because right now, one party like Malema's is not able to really win, but slowly and slowly it will be interesting to see how economically there will be empowerment when the economic structure has not been transformed.
Analysts say that South Africa will go into the election while grappling with high levels of poverty and unemployment, currently standing at over 32%. Corruption allegations and disunity within the ruling ANC are also contributing to the opposition's growing support across the country. Paul Diho, VOA News, Washington.
Russia continues to expand its operations and influence in Africa with ties in the Central African Republic, the Sahel region, North and Southern Africa. A recent report from the U.S. Department of State on Russia-Africa relations says Russia is actively spreading disinformation about the United States and European countries on the continent, while the Africa Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington says the outcomes from Russia's interventions in Africa will have far-reaching implications for governance, norms and security on the continent. Now, for more insight, I'm joined by Joseph Sigo, Director of Research, Africa Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University. Mr. Sigo, welcome again to Africa 54.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, what does Kremlin want in Africa?
Well, the Kremlin wants a number of things in a strategic sense. First, it wants to establish an enduring presence and influence along the Mediterranean and Red Sea, where it can interdict maritime movements and pose a threat to NATO. Secondly, Russia is trying to gain influence and present itself as a global power by showing that it can gain more influence and activity within Africa at the expense of the West. And Russia is trying to do this without actually investing in Africa. Rather, it is doing that by promoting large volumes of disinformation that are trying to create negative impressions about the West and positive impressions about Russia.
Right.
In the process, Russia is trying to undermine democracy on the continent. This is a means of Russia gaining more influence because it can cut deals with autocratic leaders without having to worry about the popular support. This also enhances Russia's view for a global order that would be more transactional, would have less emphasis on democracy, human rights, and accountability.
Now, we also note that even after Yevgeny Prigozhin's death, the Wagner Group is still operating in Africa. And we would like our viewers to hear what concerns you most about the activities of the Wagner Group on the continent.
Yes, well, the operations of the Wagner Group have officially been taken over by the Kremlin, and they're now rebranding it as the Africa Corps. But throughout its time in Africa since 2017, the Wagner Group has been associated with instability. Its focus is not on citizen protection, but it's really about regime protection. And by propping up specific regimes, namely in Central African Republic, in eastern Libya with warlord Khalifa Haftar, with the juntas in the Sahel, primarily Mali and Burkina Faso, and to a lesser extent Niger, and with support to the RSF in Sudan. Russia is trying to carve out zones of influence where it can extract resources and have more sway on the continent, again, without doing so through traditional security agreements, without trade, without benefiting through investments. In the process, Wagner has been associated with human rights abuses in each of these places where it's been involved. It's annexed territory in each of these places. And so there's a real challenge to popular sovereignty as a result of the Wagner Group and now the AFRICORPS influence on the continent.
So what can Africa do, and what can the government do to cushion the continent from being destabilized by Russia?
Well, there's several things that can be done. First, there should be reinforcement of the protocol against mercenary forces on the continent. All foreign forces that come in should be validated and subject to the rule of law and transparent agreements. Notably, the way Russia is gaining influence is often by co-opting authoritarian governments and the military juntas on the continent. And so a way to guard against this undue influence and this co-option that we're seeing is by promoting more democracy. Citizen groups, civil society, media, and regional bodies, the regional economic communities and the African Union need to uphold democratic norms. This then can allow more transparency for how these security arrangements are upheld. There can be investigations when there are human rights abuses. There can be open media sources that can report on their activities. Currently, all these things are being shut down so they can operate in an opaque environment that is enabling them to have more influence.
Joe, many thanks for your insight. Joe Segal.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Joe Segal is Director of Research, Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Although the Israel-Hamas fighting in Gaza shows no signs of ending anytime soon, the international community is already looking at the day-after scenario in the enclave. The U.S. says it wants to see a demilitarized Palestinian state headed by a revitalized Palestinian Authority. But Israel rejects the creation and recognition of a Palestinian state. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
With Israelis still traumatized by the October 7th Hamas massacre, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, this week overwhelmingly voted to reject unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state.
Israel will continue to oppose unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Such a recognition in the wake of the October 7th massacre would be a massive and unprecedented reward to terrorism.
The international community has sharply condemned Israel's actions in Gaza, which have led to more than 29,000 dead, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, and a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. They have also said that Gaza must be part of a future Palestinian state. And the Palestinian Authority, which controls the West Bank, sees the current international response to the Israel-Hamas war as an opportunity to push for that state.
The world should not heed the position of Netanyahu and his government, which rejects the two-state solution. Instead, the world should strive to end the occupation, unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine, and vote for Palestine to become a member state in the United Nations.
U.S. news reports say Washington envisions a new regional order in which Israel would agree to a demilitarized Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In return, Israel would get a long-coveted peace deal with Saudi Arabia, which in turn would get a defense pact with the U.S. Other Arab countries that already have peace agreements with Israel would provide security assurances that the Palestinian state would not become a threat to Israel. Some Palestinian analysts and former peace talks negotiators view the U.S. initiative as unrealistic and not substantive.
When the U.S. talks about a Palestinian state, I don't think there is much clarity about the substance of what this means. When they talk about it, they really are responding to a regional demand to at least have a political horizon.
It has been tried before. In 1993, Israel and the Palestinians, together with U.S. President Bill Clinton, signed the Oslo Accords, laying out a roadmap to a Palestinian state. That never happened. But some Oslo negotiators say it's not too late, even after the October 7th Hamas massacre and ensuing 4 months of war in Gaza.
Usually you make peace after war. Look at the history that we all study. When did we have in history in Europe or in other places peace treaties? After wars. So usually after wars, the hatred on both sides increases. So how come? Because people want to get rid of it, of the problem, and eventually are ready to make peace.
But Balin's vision of peace is not in line with current Israeli public opinion, according to a poll by the Israel Democracy Institute that finds 2/3 of Jewish Israelis do not support a Palestinian state, even as part of an agreement that includes peace with Saudi Arabia. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Students from over 20 universities in the U.S. and Canada are convening this weekend in Washington, D.C. for the 22nd Annual International Model African Union. The event is organized by Howard University in conjunction with the African Union Mission in Washington and some member states. VOA's Jackson Vunganyi is at the conference and joins us live. Hello, Jackson.
Hi, Esther. How are you doing?
Good. Bring us up to speed on the event and what kind of activities students are engaged in.
So, Esther, today we're at the African Union, only this time it's in Washington, D.C., and it's the mock African Union, or a simulation of the African Union. And we have student delegates who represent different countries around the continent. So basically students come and have different sessions, panels, discussion amongst themselves on issues, representing issues that these different countries have as part of their foreign policy. And I have two student delegates here that represent, have Zeda and Sana here. Zeda is a student delegate from Georgia State University, and what are you representing today?
I'm representing Niger and the Council of Economic Matters.
Okay, and so what is happening inside these sessions?
So currently we're working on a working paper that deals with how foreign authorities are coming into Africa to exploit their resources and how we want to divest from less raw material to more finished goods, and then ways in which the African Union can fund better agricultural practices to help Africa become more of a global superpower in trade.
Okay. And Sana here is now a student advisor. She used to be a delegate and a chair. Yes. What is the role of a chair in these sessions?
So the chair is here to keep order in the sessions and to make sure that the delegates in the room are actually able to get all of their ideas down on paper formally and making sure that everyone's ideas get incorporated into the final resolutions that they pass.
Okay. Have you ever been a delegate, or you just came in as a chair?
I have been a delegate before at multiple different conferences, as well as a chair here at the Model African Union.
So what happens to discussions after you're done here? What happens with these discussions and some of the papers you write?
Some of the resolutions, working papers turn into draft resolutions get finalized, and then sometimes they will be passed on to the African Union.
So this actually ends up at the African Union in Addis Ababa?
Yes, and from there they're able to read through it, and if they see something that they really enjoy, they are able to actually pull those ideas and implement them within the real African Union.
Yeah. Zeda, why is this important for you as students to be engaged in this type of simulations?
I feel this is important because it teaches students how the real world works, exactly how the African Union works. You put yourself outside of your body as a delegate into another country, realize that other countries exist and they have their own foreign policies and their own powers and weaknesses that they must abide by. So it gives you a sense of where the world is and how to be a proper diplomat.
Sana, how many students are here today and how many universities are represented?
There are about 20 different universities representing 33 different countries, so roughly 100 students.
100 students?
Yeah,
and
almost.
All the breakaway sessions?
Yeah, so they're all in different committees representing different countries and trying to get their ideas passed to make the world a better place and make the African Union a better place.
So what are the discussions like? You stand up and present your idea, and then it's discussed with the whole...
We follow the exact format of the African Union, so we have rules of procedure. We can't just get up in the middle. We have to wait for the chair to call on us. We do agenda topics, and then we follow it exactly the way the African Union would go. Once you get your chance, you get up, you make a speech in front of the entire committee, if they like it, and then you make motions, and you go from there.
Awesome. There you have it, Esther, here at the African Union. I guess, simulated African Union, and these young students having a great educational opportunity on how this type of organizations work.
Can you ask the young ladies there whether they are also experimenting on an AU model using AI?
Oh, I have a question from the host, whether you're experimenting on AU models using AI.
Not yet. So you have to do a lot of the research yourself. AI can't provide all of the answers for you. And it is encouraged to not use AI and use your own creative ideas to pass these resolutions and to create the ideas that go into these resolutions.
Yeah. Now, did you get to choose to select the country, or they selected for you?
We got the country selected for us.
Okay. And then you have to learn about the issues that those countries are.
So we learn the country's foreign policy, we learn what the country's involved in, how the country's government works, so we can represent the country.
Okay. So really, in many ways, you're representing the actual foreign policy of the country.
Yes.
Esther, back to you in the studio. Again, we'll go back into the discussions here, and we'll talk to you later.
Salute to those young ladies. They are doing a very good job. Thank you so much, Jackson. Jackson Mvunganyi reporting live for us from downtown Washington, D.C. Still to come, a former U.S. president marks 1 year in hospice care. We'll have more after this short break.
Women played a crucial role in the Sudanese revolution that eventually ousted President Omar al-Bashir. Women were also instrumental in the establishment of a new country, South Sudan. They are now calling for an end to fighting and hostilities that have persisted in both countries. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we'll hear the voices of women in Sudan and South Sudan who advocate for peace and stability. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Mvunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in...
In other news, Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has pardoned 51 civilian and military prisoners, including a general linked to post-electoral violence. Among those pardoned was a supporter of ex-President Laurent Gbagbo, General Bruno Doboble, who was jailed for 18 years for the 2011 kidnapping, torture, and murder of 2 Frenchmen, a Malaysian and a Benin national. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says that Sudan's rival forces have committed abuses that may amount to war crimes, including indiscriminate attacks on civilian sites. Thousands of people have been killed and approximately 8 million have been forced to flee their homes. And supported by Uganda's Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, Ruth Nankabirwa, the government has granted a 21-year mining license to Chinese-backed Sunbird Resources Limited for a major cement project in a mineral-rich region bordering Kenya. The project will have the capacity to produce 6,000 tons of clinker cement a day. As former President Jimmy Carter marks 1 year since the Carter Center announced he was entering end-of-life hospice care, some key parts of his legacy, both as president and global humanitarian, are in jeopardy. VOA's Ken Faribault explains.
More than 2 months since former President Jimmy Carter last appeared in public, attending his wife Rosalind Carter's funeral services in Georgia. 4 months since he quietly celebrated his 99th birthday October 1st, and now a year since the Carter Center announced he was receiving end-of-life hospice care, he continues to defy the odds.
He's very old and very frail.
Author Jonathan Alter, who chronicled Carter's life in the book His Very Best, says the decision to announce the former president was entering hospice care has raised awareness about end-of-life caregiving, in much the same way the Carters spent decades trying to remove the stigma associated with mental illness.
I don't think there was any anticipation, any expectation that he would still be in hospice a year later.
While now out of the spotlight, the Carters' global nonprofit Carter Center continues to wage peace, fight disease, and build hope around the world. One of the center's key campaigns, the complete eradication of parasitic guinea worm infections, has been one of its most successful.
13 human cases reported in 2023.
Adam Weiss is the current director of the Carter Center's guinea worm eradication program.
With such few human cases, the biggest risk is about the reinfection of humans from some of the animal infections that are occurring primarily in Chad and Mali, Cameroon, and Angola.
While 9 of those 13 cases were in Chad, 4 of those 9 cases were in one family.
Dr. Donald Hopkins is one of the architects of the Carter Center's guinea worm eradication efforts. He says while the annual number of infections did not decrease, the total number of infections globally are dramatically different from where they began in the 1980s.
There were an estimated 3.5 million cases. Having only 13 human cases now annually means that a lot fewer people are suffering.
In recent months, the Carter Center has called for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas, which threatens to undo a pillar of Carter's legacy. The genesis of the Carter Center's efforts to promote peace and democracy around the world was born from the success of the Camp David peace accords, which Carter brokered between Egypt and Israel during his presidency in the 1970s.
This treaty is the most successful, durable treaty of the post-war era.
The treaty ended decades of conflict between Israel and one of its most powerful neighbors. But as Israel presses its offensive against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian government has threatened to suspend the 45-year-old treaty.
Given the stakes, this is a big deal and obviously very much on the mind not only of the Israelis, who I think understand its importance, but also the United States.
Alter says it also underscores Carter's unrealized dream of broader peace in the Middle East.
If Jimmy Carter were just a few years younger, you can bet that he would be in the region right now trying to make peace.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.